Hi there everyone, this is Bob Martin with the Nautilus Drydocks, and I'm going to finally delve into something that I've received a lot of email correspondence about, and that is a how-to video on converting our Nautilus Drydocks 31-inch or 177 scale Disney Nautilus model to RC. And this is going to be a little bit of a departure for me because this is going to be a step-by-step walkthrough about how I do the conversion. So if this is something that you're interested on, if you've got the parts already and you've been holding back because you're a little uncertain, follow along. We're going to bring it from raw kit to fully functional model over the course of the next few videos. So thanks for joining me. Let's get started. All right, we're going to get started by taking a look at the kit as you would receive it out of the box. And I just want to make a note at this point. Everything that you see here, and I'll try and note where there's exceptions, can be purchased from www.nautilusdrydocks.com. So be sure to check that out for all of the things that you're going to need to get this put together, as well as a lot of other really cool stuff, reference information, other build videos, and that kind of thing that you can check out along your journey. So let's take a look at the kit. So we'll start here with the main pieces. We've got the lower hull and the upper hull here. These are cast resin. You can see you got exceptionally beautiful detail. All of these rivets are hand placed in the master model. There's a lot of them, and it adds a lot of absolutely exquisite detail to this boat. All of the upper deck details scribed in place. Now you can see areas here where you've got flash from the casting process. The difference between resin kits and plastic kits is we're going to need to clean this up a little bit, but for a resin kit there's very, very little that you'll need to do here. Typically where I see it needing to be done are on the raker teeth and of course the areas where there's pass-throughs in the hull. So upper and lower hull, got the display stand. Beautiful Victorian display stand, 3 pieces there. And then we've got all of our detail pieces. We've got some brass rod for the ladder rungs for the wheelhouse. We got our wheelhouse casting. You'll see up here you've got actually 2 different options. You've got the option to display the breathers open or closed. And then you've also got the stairway hatch cover. You've got your salon window frames, all of the clear plastic pieces, dorsal fin, raker arch, the irises for the salon, the floodlight surrounds. This is the detail pieces for the inside of the wheelhouse. You can see all that great detail, all the tubing, gauges, dials, spiral speed indicator, atomic phosphorizer on the bottom of the keel, rudder. So here's your skiff. You can see you've got interior details of the skiff and the cover as well. This is the resin prop that comes with the kit. We're not going to use that for this because this is going to be an RC model. Here's our forward ram and our ship's wheel, anchors, hatches. So these are all the detail pieces that are going to come with the kit as you'll receive it out of the box. Now let's talk about the functional pieces. This is a subdriver unit that's sold on the nautilusdrydocks.com. It's 2 inches in diameter, a little over 12 inches in length. It's perfect size for this model kit. This is what is going to be a low pressure blower ballast system. So the model itself is going to be ballasted slightly positively, and then when the dorsal fin breaches the surface it's going to be able to draw air and blow the tank and get it back up to surfaced water line. Got 3 servos. We're only really going to be using 2 of them, one for rudder and one for pitch control. Gives you an extra one if you want to rig up some extra features down the road. So this is the business end of things. I'm going to have a beautiful brass prop that's going to be on the back. And we have just some extra gear here, a fuse that's going to be installed inside the cylinder. So there you go. That's the basic outline of everything that we are going to be using to get this model in the water. Next step is going to be to prep all these pieces for assembly. All right, before we really get into putting the model together, we need to prep the pieces. A little bit of time invested now will save a little bit of headache in the future. And what we're going to do in order to do that is clean all the parts. So these are cast parts, as I mentioned earlier, and the way that works is you've got a rubber mold, and then you use mold release to make sure that the resin that's poured in doesn't fuse to the silicone rubber. So what you're left with, in some cases, is a residue of oil on the cast parts. Now, it may be that you wouldn't clean it and things would be fine, but there's also a possibility that you try and get things put together or paint it and it doesn't work because you've got that residue on it. So we're going to be sure, do things properly, and we're going to clean it. Now, I'm not going to video the cleaning process because I'm sure you guys can handle that. Everybody's washed dishes before. You're going to use a solution of mild soapy water, hot soapy water, and I like to use a toothbrush. And the reason that I do that is because you want to make sure you get into all of the nooks and crannies of the model, scrub that residue off of the parts, rinse it, and allow it to dry thoroughly before you get started. So do that for all of your resin pieces. Make sure that they're perfectly clean before we get started, nice and dry, and we'll have a clean state to start assembling the kit. Okay, our pieces are cleaned and prepped, and now we're going to get started on the actual assembly of the model. And where I like to start is with the display stand. This will make life a little bit easier for when we start to work on the model, and it'll give us a place to start getting things put together. So we're going to need a few things. Number one is a work area. Make sure that you've got lots of room, a clean work surface, an area that you're not going to be disturbed and you're not going to disturb anybody else with paint fumes and that kind of thing. I'm going to take some fine grit sandpaper, hobby knife, X-Acto knife, and I'm going to be utilizing some files. And you can get these at hobby stores. You can get them online in sets and different profiles. I'm going to be using like a half round file here just to clean up the edges of the parts. So you can see all of the flash on the inside of these parts here right now, and I'm just going to utilize the knife, and we are going to run around and clean up the flash on the insides of all of these circles. And once that's done, you're going to want to make sure that you have a nice smooth surface. I'm just going to run this file lightly around the edges there to clean up any ridges. And then once that's done, a little bit of fine sandpaper just to make sure that everything is nice and smooth. So your task now is to do that for all of the three parts, the two end pieces, and the main support beam. So I'll leave you to that. I'll work on it here, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, our parts are prepped. They're nice and smooth, ready for assembly. Next step is to put everything together. So you're going to note that there's an inside and an outside to these parts. The outside is going to have a flush area on the bottom, and the inside is going to have a set of girders that your main support beam is going to rest in between. So make sure that we've got things oriented properly, and this is what things are going to look like once it's all put together. Now, if you're doing a display model, you can simply utilize an adhesive or glue to put it together, but as this is going to be an RC model, the stand is going to see a little bit more wear and tear. I am going to elect to utilize screws, and in this particular case I am utilizing some flathead stainless steel screws about 1 inch in length, and I'm not going to glue it because that will allow me to disassemble the stand for shipping. and also the new owner will be able to disassemble it for transport, making things a little bit easier. So all I'm going to do now is utilize a drill, and I'm going to pre-drill all of the holes for the screws. All right, I've got the holes drilled. These line up once the parts are put together. But you can see I've got a small screw in there that the screw's not going to go through. I got to open that up a little bit. So I'm going to get a larger drill bit that the threads are going to bypass when they go in. So there's the larger one. The screw's going to slip right through there. You can see I've got a good 1/4 inch of bite on the inside there. But what I don't like here is this screw sits proud of the surface. So what we're going to do is we're going to countersink that so that the screw sits nice and flush with the outside, or even countersunk a little bit. So we're going to look for a drill bit the same size as the head or slightly larger. Now when you countersink these heads, one trick that I've learned is not to use the forward rotation on your drill, but utilize the backward one. It'll still cut into the face, but it won't bite and suck the drill head in, causing too deep of a hole than what you're actually after. And there you go. That worked really well to get the countersunk head of the screw there. So now that we've got that procedure down, we can do the same thing for the other side, and we can screw our stand together and we'll have something to put our model on. All right, our stand is finished and we can put our model on it. Nice surface to work at, that's nice and stable. Upper hull and lower hull drop onto each other with a really nice solid fit, and we're going to utilize the same seam that they utilized for splitting this model for access to the inside of our RC Nautilus. The challenge is these areas right here, these salon blisters. So the issue is that the seam runs right through the middle of them, and unfortunately when we start talking about these parts, they cover the seam, which is great for a display model because you're covering up the seam, but unfortunately for an RC model it makes access a little bit problematic. So we need to get somewhat creative, and in order to do that we're going to need to address these side areas by extending the seam underneath the salon blister down here. And in order to do that we're going to need to break out some saws. So you're going to need to gear up, gather up your courage and chop into this very expensive but extremely awesome model. So let's get to that step. We'll walk you through it. So for this stage what we're going to need is the lower hull. Set your upper hull aside. Going to put our lower hull on a nice stable work surface, and what you're going to want to utilize is a razor saw. These are available from almost any hobby shop. You can get them online. I like this bigger one because it helps you make a nice straight cut. There's lots of different ones available in different thicknesses. This is the one that I typically utilize. Now it's only like a 32nd of an inch thick, which is going to be important to make sure that our seams aren't huge and ugly. So what we're going to need to do now is take our saw, cut these lower salon blister areas. Okay, so what we're going to want to do in order to get started is mark the line so that we have a nice straight cut. Going to need a pencil, and I've got a 1/4 inch thick piece of plastic. The actual thickness is not a major concern, just that it's uniform across both sides. So I'm utilizing, again, a 1/4 inch piece of plastic. You're going to want to set your model up, pin it from the back side so that that face of the salon area is flush, and then just simply take your pencil and mark along that salon blister a perfectly straight line. So you can see there now, hopefully you can see there now, the line that we're going to follow to cut. So I'm going to do that on both sides. And we'll have our guides ready to begin slicing. There we go, beautiful. All right, now is the time to gather up your courage. We're going to take our razor saw and we're going to start very slowly and carefully cutting into the model. And make sure we draw back. Now there is a lot of material that you're going to need to go through here, and I'll show that to you once you get it through. So take your time, be patient, don't rush it. So here is the end result. You can see that the thickness, that's a good 1/2 inch thick of resin that you just cut through. But if we hold this together, you can see that that seam is just like a razor blade. It is going to make for a beautiful, clean seam when we get everything put together. So now that you've done it once, let's do the other side. We'll do it again. Something else that I want to note is you want to make sure that your left and right sides are matched up to the sides that you actually cut, because you don't want to put the wrong cut piece on the wrong side. So I just marked out P for port side, or actually this would be starboard. This is the starboard side. I had it upside down when I was marking it. I guess that's not important, really, just to make sure that the sides line up with each side that you already cut, so that there is no confusion later on. Alright, in preparation for the next step, what I'm going to do is just going to take some low-tack masking tape, and what we want to do is mask off the lower hull so that any of the glue from the next step will not fuse the upper and lower hulls together. So just put a little bit of tape on each side. Like so, and then we can take our upper hull, set it in place, like that, and we are set to go. Okay, what we're going to want to do now is grab a couple of elastic bands, and we're going to band tightly the upper and lower hulls together so that they do not move and they maintain alignment for the next step. So there is our mating surface that we are going to be going with. I got my P, I got my P. This is how it's going to look once we get it in place like that. And we're going to use the rivet lines here to make sure that everything is in alignment. So what we want to do now is make sure that we have a good mating. So we're going to use some sandpaper. We're going to rough up the upper edges of the cut piece, and then we're also going to rough up the lower side of that upper hull, and this is going to create a nice strong bond between the parts once they are put together. So what I have elected to utilize in this particular case is some Gorilla brand super glue. I kind of like this stuff. This is a gel. It's nice and thick, gap filling, and as there is a little bit of a gap, maybe a 32nd of an inch in some places in here, I find it works really well, and it takes to the accelerator very well additionally. So let's put a little bit of this gel on the upper surface, making sure that we get everything covered. And then we're going to press it into place, making sure that our rivet lines are lining up. There, just like that. And then once it's flush, keep it pressed down, hit it with a little bit of accelerator, and that's going to instantly fuse this piece to the upper hull. So now that that's done, let's flip things over and we will do the same thing to the other side. Alright, next step is going to be to open up the floodlights in these basils that go on the front of the salon area. And the reason I'm doing that is because we are going to be installing LED lights, and we want to make sure that we have room, obviously, to install the LEDs, have an area that they will shine out of. So what I have done is I have chalked up a 1/4 inch drill bit, and the other one that I'm going to use for the large floodlight holes there is a 3/8 bit. And those are a little bit undersized, but we're going to clean that up with a file afterwards. And this is nice and simple. You just set this down on a drill press. You can do this manually as well, but of course this makes it just a little bit easier. Alright, it's time to install these pieces that we have just drilled out. So you can see that I've got all of them opened. I've used a file to clean them all up on the inside and the outside. What I want you to note now is that on the back of each piece there is either an L or an R, standing for left and right. So I've got the left side of my boat up. These pieces are going to be installed just like this. Now, I'm going to be honest and tell you that just because of the complexity of mating these two pieces together, you are going to need to clean out the inside so that your basil here will drop in nicely. I highly recommend investment in a Dremel tool. I use this all the time for multiple purposes in my shop. This is a cordless version. They're not terribly expensive, and there's certainly knockoff brands that you can get very, very inexpensively. I've got a little milling tip on the end of this, and this just makes my life a lot easier. This is nothing that you can't accomplish, you know, with hobby knives and that kind of thing. This just makes it a little faster and a little bit more convenient. So what you would do is simply turn it on and run it around the perimeter. And what it'll also allow you to do is kind of mill down the face so that it's nice and flat. So let's take a closer look here again at this piece. And what we want to do when we install it is make sure that we have a uniform amount protruding off of the face, and I would recommend about 1 millimeter around the entire perimeter there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that same Gorilla Gel super glue to install it. That's gap filling, you know, like I said earlier. We're going to secure it on that side, and what that's going to do is it's going to lock in that lower piece that we installed earlier. Alright, now that we have secured the basils on the outside of the salon, the lower pieces are all locked in. It's now kind of time for the moment of truth, and this is going to be a little bit worrisome as you go, because you're going to actually need to pry. You've got glue on there. That's why you want to make sure you use the low-tack masking tape so that it'll come off the lower hull fairly easily. So I'm just going to start at the back, kind of pull up here. There we go. That wasn't so bad. There is our new revised upper hull with the integrated lower salon pieces. You can see a few little areas where the glue adhered to the masking tape, but that's why we used it. So we'll peel that off. leaving the lower hull untouched, looking good. So let's drop this back on and we'll check the alignment of our pieces. There we go. Let's take a look at these seams on the bottom there. You can see that the seam is virtually invisible, even this close, looking dead on, and certainly from the side, absolutely invisible. So, success in this portion of getting the hull ready. Next step is going to be cutting the rear section with our razor saw again. Alright, one of the tricky parts is going to be creating a perfectly straight line across the tail section here. And what I'm going to do is a little trick that I've learned, and that's utilizing a square, pencil, some elastic bands, and a 90-degree surface. You could also use this for scribing water lines on submarines as well. But what I'm going to do, I've got this set up here. I've got a prop underneath the back of the hull to keep it perfectly level. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the model down, keep the square to the wall here, and I'm just going to run this pencil up the hull, keeping everything nice and square, just like that. And what we end up with is a perfectly perpendicular demarcation line on the hull. Back to the razor saw again. Keep everything pressed down and nice, slow, deliberate strokes. Keeping all the lines lined up. And we're done. As easy as that. Alright, I had to charge up the battery on the camera, so I used that time to good use, and I cleaned up the flash on the hull pieces using my file to clean up all of the flash around the insides of the hatches and the dive plane areas. Note that you've got a little inset in there in the front that needs to be cleaned out, as well as the back on the front, and then only in the back of the rear dive planes there as well. Just used a little bit of fine grit sandpaper, ran it up the raker teeth to make sure that those are nice and clean as well. Did that on the lower hull and the tail section as well. Other thing that I did is I ran a bead of glue around the inside of the salon iris area. And that is just going to really solidify all of this assembly right here to make sure that it is good and strong. I used a little bit of a different glue for that, and this is a rubber reinforced CA glue. It's black, and the reason I like it is because CA glue is typically quite brittle once it hardens. They've added rubber particles to this glue, and that gives it a little bit of flexibility and also a little bit of thickness, of viscosity, that allows it to stand up, be a little bit easier to apply. So this is all strong and clean right now. All of these pieces are ready to go. Now what we're going to do is going to move on to installation of the ram. And the way that I do it, the ram actually forms the hold down for the upper hull to the lower hull, so you don't have to worry about any screws or anything like that. So let's take a look at how I fabricate that. All right, here are all of the pieces that we are going to use. I've got 3 different sizes. I've got of brass. I've got tubing and rod. This is a 5/32 inch diameter solid brass rod, a 3/16 inch diameter brass tube, and a 1/4 inch brass tube. And each one of these pieces will nest into the piece underneath it, just like that. And you'll see why that's important in a moment. Now this is the stock ram that comes with the model. It's made out of resin. There is a reinforcing pin down the center. But what we're actually going to do is basically remove everything except the tip and replace it with this brass tubing. So the first thing to do is measure out this forward section of 1/4 inch. And that works out to about 22 millimeters. So we're going to cut that and then cut off the tip of the ram and fabricate the new ram. All right, back to using the Dremel. I've got a cutoff wheel in my Dremel. You can use a saw or even that razor saw, but just note again that in the middle of this ram there is a steel pin. So really this cutoff wheel is what you're going to want to use. So I'm just going to leave about 1/4 inch back from the tip of the ram there, and I'm going to cut this clean off. There we go, just like that. And this is the important piece that we are going to want to retain. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use my Dremel with a sanding disc, and I'm just going to remove just like a 32nd of an inch of diameter of that back piece there so that I can slip the brass tubing over it. There we go, just like that. All right, we'll see how close I got on my first try here. There's a piece of 1/4 inch brass tube that I cut and the forward ram piece, and I'm just gonna press fit. And there we go. So we've now got a replacement forward section of the ram. This is the visible piece that you'll see. Now we're gonna move on to the hidden piece that's gonna go inside the model, and we're gonna use for that this 5/32 brass tubing. So in order for it to nest nicely, what we're going to need to do is insert this, mark it off, cut it, and install that in there. All right, let's install this piece. And what I'm actually going to do before that, I'm just going to use a little bit of thin CA glue. This is like a water viscosity CA glue. And just put a little bit around the tip of the ram just to secure that piece of brass in place. And slip this insert in place, and we're going to use a little bit of glue there. And now right away you can actually install this one as well, and as a tip, rough it up with sandpaper. That gives the glue something to adhere to. I'm going to slip that in there like that. Get some glue on there. Just like that. So we now have our ram with a really, really long shaft on there. Now all we need to do is take our hull, and we're going to take a look at this recess in the front, and we're going to measure off the length of our shaft, just like that, and it can be approximate, and cut that off there now. Alright, we are ready to start installing all of this fun stuff. So we've got our new brass shafted ram that's going to go on the front, and I have cut 2 pieces of the 3/16 inch diameter brass tubing that slips over the shaft nicely, as you can see there. So what this is going to do is form the hold down for the boat. Now we're going to take one of these pieces of brass that we just made. I roughed up the exterior with sandpaper, as I mentioned before, and I'm going to utilize this rubber reinforced cyanoacrylate, and I'm going to put a bead down in that front section, and I'm going to fit that piece just like that, making sure that it's in seated tightly. I'm going to put some accelerator on there, and that is the forward part of the hold down. So you can see now what we'll be able to do is slip our ram into it just like that. So now we're going to move on to the tricky part, and that's the installation of the other brass tube in the upper hull, and that's how the two are going to get held together. So when we install or glue the tube in the upper hull, we do not want it to fuse to the lower hull, so we're going to break out our handy low-tack masking tape again, and we're just going to put that on the lower part there, pushing it down in place with that brass tubing so that it is forced all the way down into the bottom as much as possible. We keep alignment with the forward tube there. So that's going to stop the glue from adhering to the lower hull and fusing our two halves together again. Alright, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to place this brass tubing in place. I am going to take my ram, I am going to push that through both pieces. Now we've got perfect alignment between each of these two brass pieces. I am going to put some more of this glue on the upper part of that, and I'm also going to put some on the upper hull in the back where it'll fuse together, and then simply set the upper hull onto the lower hull just like that. Perfect. Now we are going to spray in some accelerator in there, and I'm just going to let it sit so that if the accelerator did not actually grab that upper piece, it'll cure on its own. So now that that's in there, let's just make sure that it sits nice and tight. I'm going to band it with that rubber band, make sure that that's held down good and tight, and let it set. We'll come back to it shortly. Alright, next up we are going to install the breathers into the back section of the wheelhouse. And you've got two options here. You've got the closed breather assembly or the open breather assembly. I'm going to install the open breather assembly. It adds a lot of visual interest to the boat. According to the movie, these were only deployed when the boat was surfaced. I will note that if you use these closed ones, when you go to install them in the wheelhouse, as you can see, they kind of sit proud on the rear section there. A little bit too high for my taste. Certainly they look fine, you know, as they are. I like to, however, just use some sandpaper and sand the bottom edge so that it sits a little bit more flush. But since we're going to be using these pieces, when you install them, they actually fit just about perfectly. So I've gone ahead, I've already cleaned up the flash on this particular piece. So what I'm going to do is just simply glue them down again with a little bit of this gap filling CA glue. Press them in place. I'll hit it with some accelerator and we'll be done. Alright, we're going to move back to the main hull now. The basils around the salon area, you can see that there are some gaps. You know, again, if you're not a super stickler, you can leave them and it looks okay, but of course we want to do, you know, a really good job. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill those. I'm going to show you how I do that. In the past I've used glazing putty. Unfortunately for large gaps like that, what you'll end up with is shrinkage, and then you'll have to put multiple coats on. It's a lot more work. I'm going to use some body filler. I use this for bigger fills. This is Evercoat Rage. I love this stuff. It sticks really, really well. It adheres really, really well. It cures very quickly, and it's extremely durable and hard without being brittle. If you don't want to get this, which I think is the smallest size available, this green putty from Squadron is available at most hobby stores. Good to have, you know, if you need to fill in any imperfections in your models. So this is a two-part filler. It's very easy to use. The biggest trick is that you need to be aware that it'll kick off fairly quickly once you mix the activator, the hardener, with it. So you don't need very much for what we're going to be using. I'll just use a tray here. The other thing that you're going to need to have ready is a little bit of acetone and a clean rag so that we can clean up the surface in there and have a nice finish without having to do very much sanding or other finishing. So I'm going to put just a little bead of the filler on the top. It doesn't take too much, and we're going to mix that all up. There we go. So let's take a look at the area we're going to be working on. And I am going to simply utilize my finger to apply this around the perimeter. And you want to force it into that gap. And don't worry if you get it on the face, you know, we're going to be working through that. Alright, so we've got the filler applied to the perimeter there. I'm going to put actually just a little bit more right here in this crease. There we go. Get the acetone out. I'm going to put a little bit on my rag. And now we're just simply going to wipe off the excess. Alright, and this is what the finished, filled product looks like. We're going to let that kick off and cure. Like I said, it's not going to take very long at all, and in the meantime we can flip it over and work on the other side. Okay, we are getting close to finishing up this first section, and we are going to do so by mounting the rear fin assembly and creating the indexing pin on the upper hull so that we have a complete opening and closing hull. And in the next sections we'll move on to some installation of the running gear and cosmetics. What you're going to need to do is fabricate something like this, and this is a 3D printed part that I created, and it's going to mount into the upper fin assembly, something like this. And again, this is just how I do it. You can create your hold downs differently if you want to tap in from the bottom. So let's just take another quick look there. Like I said, this is the upper fin assembly and this mounting ring. And what that mounting ring is also going to do is not only give us something to run a bolt up into from the lower hull, but it's actually going to contain all of the linkages in the back for the tilting propeller assembly. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is rough up the exterior of this piece, and we are going to adhere it into the upper fin assembly with the rubber reinforced cyanoacrylate. Alright, as you can see here, I have the mounting bracket installed in the upper hull very securely with rubber reinforced cyanoacrylate. As I mentioned, it's exceptionally important to rough up both surfaces so that you get a very strong connection between these parts, because this is going to be the only thing holding your entire upper hull onto your model. So there's a lot of surface area in there. You're going to want to make sure that that's a good, strong connection. Rough up the surfaces with rough sandpaper or your Dremel tool. So let's put this back in place here. We're going to set it where it goes. I'm going to use a marker, and I'm going to mark the leading edge of that mounting bracket so that when I remove this, you can see exactly where that is. So there you can see right there, the leading edge of the hold down bracket. Now what we are going to do is select our hardware, and this is an M4 stainless steel nut and bolt. It is flat head, approximately 3/4 of an inch long. So what we want to do is get a drill bit just slightly larger than the diameter of these threads, and we're going to drill a hole through the lower hull so that we can run this through to mount the fin. Alright, when you select the location of your hole, I like to put it in the lower face of the hull. You note that you've got some prop shroud supports that exit the hull on that bottom section right there. You want to make sure that you're going to be able to miss that. So you're going to go in as low, close to the heel as you can. Also note that you're going to see a small indentation on the bottom, so if you're going to have a cosmetic side of your model, you're going to want to make sure to mount the hold down screw on the opposite side. So I run my linkages on the port side, leaving the starboard side clean, so that's where I'm going to mount my hold down screw. And I'm just going to transfer that mark from the inside of the hull to the outside of the hull, just like that, and it happens to line up perfectly with the leading edge of that prop shroud support right there. And now I am going to drill in my hole, making sure that it is running straight to the center of the model. There we go. So that done, we're going to put this back onto the stand, put our hold down bracket back in place, and we're going to put our upper hull in place exactly where it goes. Now this is important because you're going to have a little bit of movement on that rear section. You want to make sure that everything is going to line up absolutely perfectly. So I'm going to twist this to the side like this. Keep everything nice and tight together. Now I'm going to go back through the same hole again at the same angle, and I am going to drill through that mounting bracket for the upper fin. Perfect. So now we have a hole in the lower hull and a hole in our mounting bracket that are perfectly aligned with each other. Now what we're going to do is countersink this hole in the lower hull so that the screw sits perfectly flush with the outside of the hull. There we go, perfectly flush fit with the outside of the model, and by design of course, the prop shroud support is going to hide that from view once it's put in place. Alright, the next step is going to be to secure the stainless steel nut to the inside of that ring and mount it permanently so that it does not come out or twist as we secure the bolt to the hull. Okay, what we need to do now is secure that nut, that stainless steel nut, to the ring permanently. Now you can do that with glue, but I find that it will, or can, let go over time. So actually what I'm going to do is just one step further. I'm going to melt that nut into the ring using a little hobby blowtorch. You can see right here. Just heat it up a little bit. I'm going to pull that out so that it sinks into that plastic and embeds itself in there permanently. It's just a little bit of extra security. Really it's not vital because all of your force is going to be out and not in. But again, it's just one step further to make sure that it stays secured. So I'm just going to tighten that just a little bit in here. I'm going to grip my bolt with my pliers, set this on low flame, and I'm just going to heat that nut up. Okay, here is our finished product. I've got some more glue on the inside just to hold that nut in place in there. It lines up perfectly with the lower hull, and once we put the securing bolt in place, that gets locked down really strongly. Alright, the next step is going to be to create a lip or a tab that will fit underneath that upper section so that we can drop this down and the upper hull will be locked in place. Now you can use a lot of different materials. I've elected to use just a little piece of fiberglass sheet that I had left over. That's about 1/16 of an inch. It's very strong, got a little bit of flex to it, which is actually what I want. And it's also got a little bit of curve to it, which is another thing that I want. So what we're going to do is adhere that to the inside of the hull, something like this, to create our tab. And I'm going to use rubber reinforced cyanacrylate for that as well. Alright, here you can see the final piece in place. It's been secured. There's the tab from the top. It doesn't need to be very long actually, you know, about 1/4 of an inch is more than adequate. Now, there's one last thing that we need to do, and this all has to do with the geometry of this model. You need to be able to slip this down and then lay the entire hull down, but unfortunately this tab on the inside that overlaps the lower hull, so these side keels, are going to need to get trimmed so that they'll slip over top of this back section. And I'm going to illustrate what I need with this marker, what we're going to do. So what we're going to need to do with our Dremel or with a file is grind about 1.5 inches in a straight line back on both sides So by the time you get to the back, it's about 1/8 of an inch and 1.5 inches up. So 1.5 inches and 1/8. You're going to grind this out on both sides so that we can install the upper hull onto the lower. Alright, here's my finished procedure. Again, just used a Dremel, but you can use a file. Both of these lines are perpendicular to one another, running parallel to the center line of the boat. So what that allows us to do now is put the upper hull onto the lower hull about 1 inch forward of that seam there. You slip it back, grab your side keels, split them apart, and there we go. That is a razor thin seam line right there. You can barely see it. And we've now got a hull that is completely assembled, locked down, and once we install the running gear, ready for the water. So that front ram assembly is basically what holds everything in. Just pop that out, slip it off. It is that easy for access. Well, that concludes part 1 of the build blog for this 1/77th scale Disney Nautilus RC conversion. All parts supplied by yours truly, the Nautilus Drydocks. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to join me for part 2, where I'll continue the journey to turn this into a fully functional RC model. Thanks a lot for joining me. We'll catch you next time.